Welcome to our next session, everybody. We are going to keep the great thoughts and discussion going on remote and distributed work during crises. We have Gary A. Bolles here with us, who is the chair of or for the future of work here at Singularity University, where he focuses on the strategies to help create a human-centric future of work for individuals, organizations, communities, and countries. Thank you for joining us today, Gary.
It's great to be here.
Well, let's get into it.
Excellent. All right. Well, good morning from San Francisco. I just want to give thanks to Adam and the team for all their hard work to pull all of this off. There's so many people working behind the scenes at Singularity University to make this all happen. Please thank them in the chat line when you get the chance. They're doing tremendous work. Thanks also to Charlene for providing some of the strategic overview for organizational leaders on a lot of these issues related to remote and distributed work. Even though she lives just a few blocks from me here in San Francisco, we're maintaining our social distance. Thanks also to Aaron for giving us some thoughts around virtual work. So I want to build on these ideas by offering some thoughts about how we can all work in these extraordinary times, and especially how we can work with each other. I think we've all pretty much agreed that there's just a big reset or pause button that's been hit. We know from people like Ray Kurzweil and Peter Diamandis that we live in science fiction times. In just the past few weeks, I think we can all be forgiven that we feel like we've involuntarily been cast in a dystopian movie. In a blindingly short period of time, this pause button has been hit all around the world. And you'd think that only a Hollywood scriptwriter could have envisioned a way that suddenly hundreds of millions of people would suddenly become isolated from each other almost overnight. What's unique is the speed and the spread of that impact on our lives and our economies. It's a sudden whack to the side of the head for a large percentage of our world. But what I don't think is unique is that we as humans have always lived through these extraordinary times, whether it's an earthquake or a fire, as we're prone to here in the San Francisco Bay Area, or it's a flood, or it's a war. As a species, we've weathered these storms before. See if this sounds familiar to you. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom. It was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief. It was the epoch of incredulity. It was the season of light. It was the season of darkness. It was the spring of hope. It was the winter of despair. We had everything before us, and we had nothing before us. We were all going directly to heaven, or we were going direct the other way. In short, the period was so far like the present period that some of its noisiest authorities insisted on its being received, for good or for evil, in the superlative degree of comparison only. Yes, that's Charles Dickens from A Tale of Two Cities, which he wrote in 1859. And I think what it shows us is that our current crisis is unique, but it's also hauntingly familiar. As I posted last fall in my feed on LinkedIn, I said that the real test of the future of work was likely to be the next global crisis. And here we are. I'm going to focus specifically on issues related to work and organizations, but there's also life issues of our communities, our countries, our families, our friends, and our fellow citizens that I think all come to the fore when we talk about our work, and especially work in these uncertain times. So I'm going to give you some pointers on some of the things I think that each of us can do to make our distributed work more effective, but I also want to urge everyone listening not just to think differently, but to act differently. And I'm going to talk about how I approach that. And I think one of the best ways, we talked a lot at Singularity University about what happens when we've got this sort of reset button on what we do for organizations and what we do in times of exponential change. It's also a reset button for work, and especially for so many of us who are now distributed. And I think what we need is to think of not just the techniques and processes for when we suddenly find ourselves, separated by virtual distance, but how we develop the mindset and the skill set. And as a matter of fact, in any domain, it's this yin and yang of helping to ensure that we not only have the tools and techniques that Charlene was talking about, but we also have a mindset shift. So the difference, highlighting the difference that I show is, if I wave a magic wand and you have suddenly we're standing at the foot of a mountain and you have all of the skill set of a mountain climber, but you look up at the top of the mountain and you say, oh no, that's too cold, that's too high. You're not going to climb the mountain. You have all the skill set, but none of the mindset. If I wave my magic wand again and suddenly you have all the mindset, but none of the skill set, you've never climbed a mountain before, but you look up at the top and you think, well, how hard could that be? And you take 1 step, 2 steps, you encounter hardships, you solve problems, but eventually you're at the top of the mountain and you look down and you say, well, how hard could that be? So that's the mindset and skill set that I think that we need to focus on in this, and what I think of as the COVID shift. It's testing each of our ability to change, each of our ability to adapt. If you like that sort of framing, then Carol Dweck, the author, talks about the difference between a growth and a fixed mindset. And there's nothing wrong with a fixed mindset. It's just that in times of exponential change, it's much, much harder to be able to continually adapt. And I think that's a challenge for all of us, but especially, for those of us who have become more accustomed to work that is actually pretty consistent and pretty much the same thing day to day. And so developing that growth mindset is critical. So I'm going to point to a range of different resources as I go along. I've got links to all of these on my website at gbolles.com, but if you find these issues of mindset and skill set important, then Carol Dweck has a great book to use as a resource. So I think our message now is we suddenly all are finding that many of us are having to work in place. We have to figure out what this new skill set is. What's the process that we're going to be able to do collaboration. We're going to continue to do our work as individuals. We're going to continue to collaborate. And it's pretty complicated. There's lots of different issues, especially when I lecture and write about the future of work. I did 71 talks around the world last year. I try to sort of distill this down into 4 different domains. So I talk about individuals, organizations, communities, and countries. And so now that we're talking about distributed work, I think it's important to maybe talk about a few strategies in each of those. And then I want to sort of wrap up with some thoughts about how we can be responsive in these exponential times. And then let's make it a discussion. I'd love to hear your questions and thoughts. And so let's focus first on the skill set and mindset for individuals. If we're going to distill down to sort of one basic challenge and opportunity when we're thinking about doing more work on our own, more work distributed and virtually, I've been working out of the house, my home office, with my wife and business partner Heidi for over 15 years. And what I find is that continually helpful to be able to distill down to is what are the problems, like really become very problem centric in the work that we do. How do we step back and really look at exactly the problems that we're trying to solve? And so I often say work is just the 3 things. It's a problem to be solved, whether it's a dirty floor or complex market entry strategy or the designing a new product for our customers. How do we solve problems? We perform tasks, and how do we perform tasks? We use our human skills. So, and it turns out in many organizations, we tend to have lots of tasks and we group them together. We call them processes, and then we sort of fall in love with our processes and we forget the problem that we're solving. And so, so it's important to stay very problem centric in our work, and especially when suddenly we've gone through this big reset button in doing work from remote and distributed. How do we think of new ways that we can build new practices that we can continually be solving the problems? And how do we rethink those processes so that they're as effective as possible? Now, it just so happens that I was never all that interested in college when I was young. I sort of fell into the family business, and the family business just happened to be, my father was the author of a book called What Color's Your Parachute, which was sort of become the world's enduring career manual. And what he saw was a pattern of how we work and what the work environment was. And he said, well, we have these skills, that we apply to human problems and our knowledges, but we also have a workplace. We've got sort of the physical context. We've got geographical conditions where we work. the kinds of people that we work with, that we see on a regular basis, and of course, then how we're compensated. And I'll talk a little bit about purpose later on. What's happened in the COVID shift is suddenly issues related to the workplace, related to our geography, related to people that we work with have all become, as my friend John Hagel at the White Center for the Edge says, unbundled. And so this is what kind of looks like in this era. We go from this sort of construct, this use case of a job, to all these different pieces sort of being exploded. And now what we used to think of as a fairly stable environment of the workplace has become completely unbundled. And the workplace, the anchor for our workplace is for many of us is now our home. Now, there's lots of people that are still in critical services that still are dealing with the public, but for the most part, we're finding that many of us are having to rethink the context of that workplace. And so here's one way I would suggest we sort of do that mindset shift and reset is first off to think of ourselves as problem solvers. In every organization, there's one or two people that think it's their job to create problems, and you know exactly who those are in your company. But for the most part, we're problem solvers. We have to be adaptive. As my friends Heather McGowan and Chris Shipley say in their book, The Adaptation Advantage, we have to develop the skill set around being continually adaptive. I say in one of my courses on LinkedIn Learning, there's no such thing anymore as change management. It's all become managing change. So we must be continually adaptive. We have to use creative problem solving to solve these problems, especially becoming more creative when we're distributed and remote. This is what's going to keep us ahead of robots and software. And then finally, we've got to do it with empathy. We've got to remain connected and linked to our coworkers, to our customers, to solving the problems that we need to be able to continually create the value that our organizations create. So individuals, I'm going to give you just a couple of quick thoughts and then point you to a couple of resources. So number one, back up to the problems that you're trying to solve. Number two, there's a whole work rhythm, alternating rhythms that we have in our lives, and we're working together in the same physical space. You have to design those new work rhythms, but try to make sure that they're continually alternating. Don't just stare at your screen all day. Get up and move around, get outside the house. You've got much more flexibility now in your work times. You don't have to be completely locked into the physical meetings that you used to have. It's increasingly important, and Charlene talked about trust and the importance of being able to continually reinforce new ways to be able to connect with others. That's how we build trust, is that personal connection. It's important to not only try to trust others and to trust them that they're doing their work, that they're doing their best to try to solve the problems in front of them, but also to be trustworthy ourselves. And then finally, as many people have said on the chat thread, we've got to stay connected. We got to stay engaged. It's very, very lonely when suddenly we become isolated. There's a great book called Remote by the authors of the founders of the Basecamp collaboration software, 37 Signals. Pluralsight has a great remote work guide that I think would be very useful. Has a lot of techniques. And then they've also got a free course calling Making Work from Home Work for You that you might want to check out. So that's for individuals. Now, what about organizations? Well, I think in the same way that we can talk about a mindset shift, a COVID shift, and the way we work as individuals, we got to do the same thing in how we collaborate with each other and how we think about just what an organization is. We built organizations in this era and this shift to industrial and then post-industrial economies. And we have this place-based model of mass production, initially of products and then eventually of information. And we created these constructs called big cities with commutes. And then we tried to mass customize the problem of trying to collaborate in different work. And we simply replicated a lot of those same processes in how we process information and work together. And so what we did is we created this thing that I call a box. And inside the box is a hierarchy. There's, as my friend Peter Diamandis says, there's abundance outside the box and there's scarcity inside the box. And typically just traditional employees and sort of that one use case for work. Well, we're going through a world of exponential change, and this isn't just in the COVID shift. It's also in The fact that we've got all these non-traditional ways in which people are working. We've got everything from temporary workers to remote workers, gig workers, online platforms, online communities, mentorships, apprenticeships. Well, the box is no longer sufficient. It's no longer able to house all these tremendous skills and capacities in different workcases. So I say we have to shift to a new model, which I call the network, capital N and capital W. This is how we need to think about how we work, especially when we're more distributed. There's no hard edges to the organization. There's a wide range of different skills and people that can help us to solve the problems of the organization. As we go through the COVID shift, once our world starts to right itself and the collective madness starts to subside, we're going to have a period where we're going to need to figure out how we're going to involve more and more people in economic benefit. Because right now we're suddenly we're shutting down a lot of the economic processes by which we all make money and have productive lives. And so we're going to have to leverage this much more flexible model of what an organization is to continually involve a wide range of people in helping to solve the problems of the organization. I've got a number of techniques I talk about for managers, but basically it's to rethink the role of the team. And again, Charlene was talking about some of the things we need to do around communication. I want to talk about sort of the core purpose, which is, a team has a common purpose. They've got a coordinated effort in what they're doing, and they hold themselves mutually accountable for results. And then I always say, then they dynamically bind around problems. And in this era where we're more distributed in our work, it's critical to think about how you define the problem that you're solving. Every time you get on a video call with your coworkers, that's a great way to start. What is the problem that we're solving here? And try to be as efficient as possible so you can then move on to the next problem. So, and if you look at the folks at Buffer, have a great way of thinking about this. Is we went from this sort of office-based, the people that were solving the problem were all in front of each other, and then you start to move along this slider. Now you've got maybe some home option, letting people work from home every now and then. Then you've got one or more workers that are remote but are in the same time zone, and now they're in multiple time zones. And now you've got nomadic workers, and everybody's very flexible. And so depending upon the kind of work, kind of organization that you have, you're moving along this slider, and we suddenly, when we hit the reset button, we suddenly all became distributed teams. And I think it's important for us to continually think of the ways that we can leverage that process and be able to build much more flexible work environments to be able to continually manage our distributed work. Just some ideas for that distributed team and for the ways we can sort of set the reset button for the organization. First off, help teams within the organization to redefine around those problems to be solved. Secondly, I know there was some question somebody had of Charlene about teaching and learning. My great friend Esther Wojcicki, who wrote the book Moonshots in Education, she talks about some great techniques for doing that. It turns out they're very useful as well for thinking about rethinking the manager's role. She talks about going from the sage on the stage to the guide on the side. And this is really what the role and opportunity for the manager is. No longer this, as Charlene was saying, the person with the answer, but the person with all the best questions. I think it's also critical as we go through this sort of recovery from the COVID shift. How do we rethink location? How do we not replicate these same challenges that we've created by being so place-based that when we get these resets, it's very difficult for us to be able to adapt. I haven't talked at all about how technology can be useful, about how AI can help us to develop our own superpowers. One thing I want to caution is we automate more and more tasks. And of course, when we go through this kind of reset, we're going to have an impetus to try to automate more and more tasks. I want to urge decision makers to think about how to make that as inclusive work as possible, not just to quote unquote free up workers with AI and robotic process automation to make sure they have new work. It's not, 100% freed up worker is called unemployed. So let's not do that. And then finally, build processes for training for adaptability. How do we help people to continually not think of this as some change management process, but continually managing change? The Bible on this is John O'Doin's Distributed Teams book. He's got a ton of great techniques. I've also got a course on LinkedIn learning about developing adaptive managers, but the basic premise is If you go to John's blog at oduin.com, you'll see he's actually got a blog specifically about how to go through this kind of adaptation to distributed work. And as Charlene was saying, it's very important to think of this as distributed work, not remote work, as in we're remote from each other. I haven't the remotest idea how we're going to figure all this out. It's actually that we're distributed, that these are continually shifting work contexts. And we have to think of this as the new normal. If you're an organization leader or an HR and you need documents or policies to help you to sort of work this through, draft policies, srhrm.org, SHRM.org has a lot of great resources to be able to use. So we've talked about individuals, organizations. I want to talk about communities. And we tend to ignore an awful lot of this when we talk about the future of work, and we talk especially about distributed work is communities. We know, you can see looking around, the impact of this reset and this isolation on your community, on workers, on people who do not have the capacity to be able to work from remote. What are the ways we can think about how we can ensure that we are building a set of inclusive solutions? Once we've gone through this isolation period, we're going to go through a process of reconnecting. Well, there's a whole bunch of people that are not, it's not easy for them to reconnect. If you look at this chart that Bloomberg put together, on the low end to the right is wages scale, and it's actually the jobs that pay some of the lowest that are the hardest to work from remotely. These are the people that are on the front lines. They have to continue working through this era, or if they can't, then they suddenly have huge economic challenges. So it's the people that make more money, typically the people that can work more remote, that are, these are high-class problems that we're dealing with. They're still challenging, but we still have the opportunity to generate a paycheck. And there's a lot of people that are not going to have that same capacity. And so as we recover from the COVID reset, what are the things that we can do to continually reinvest in making those connections in our communities? And remember that there's actually two kinds of problems. So I talked a lot about that work is our human skills applied to tasks to solve problems. Those are the problems that we choose. But there are also problems that choose you. You didn't choose to be homeless. You didn't choose to be handicapped, to be subject to war, to be a migrant, to be a refugee. There's tons of problems in the world that choose you. And there are people that have those problems, have chosen them in our communities. What are the ways we can build a very inclusive set of processes in building strategies around how we make for more inclusive work? So here's some examples for you. If you're an organizational leader, help your organization to become more flexible. Require workers to work from remote for once a week when they can, depending upon their work, so that they can continually build this flexible tissue of being able to continually adapt. Whenever you can, hire distributed workers. Don't just focus on what I think of as the dystopian future, where some other speakers were talking about we might have 80% of all the humans on the planet in big city. That doesn't sound like a great future to me. Hire from people in remote areas and leave them in place. And also hire non-traditional backgrounds. Look for the people that have been affected. Look for the people that have the transferable skills that might help you to solve the problems of your organization. And think about those are the people that you hire as we go through the process of rebuilding from the COVID shift. So I've talked about individuals, organizations, and communities. Now let's talk about countries. Let's talk about how we think about this collectively. So my old friend Clay Shirky, John Oduin reminded me, he's got this great quote. It isn't about technology at the end of the day. As much as at Singularity University, we talk about exponential technologies, as much as Ray and Peter help us to understand all of the ways that we can leverage these exponential technologies. At the end of the day, it's about new behavior. It's how we act differently, and we act differently when we think differently. And so this reconnection process we can do in a way that involves everybody, that ensures that we have broadly beneficial futures of work, or it can ensure that we actually have a bunch of people that are isolated. So One way I encourage people to step back and think during these times of profound change is to answer just two very basic questions. In 10 years, what will we wish we had done today? When we're looking back in 10 years, how will we be saying to ourselves we did the right things? Running to the grocery store and buying all the toilet paper you possibly can might not be the kind of thing you look back on with all of the best views of your prior self, but to think of the ways that we think of how we're all continually working together, collaborating to create that more positive future. And then if we're successful, how will we know? What are the sniff tests? What are the results we're going to look for when we've built that more inclusive future, where we're trying to ensure that we all have the in place and the distributed work that we all need to be able to thrive. So here's a couple of suggestions. We need to figure out what are the policies as countries, as regions, as a global workforce. How do we help people to continually find or create meaningful, well-paid work? How do we create the policies that can reduce the friction, increase access? Because we know that there's going to be a ton of people that are going to need to either create new work or are going to need to be able to build what I call portfolios of work, where work is going to come from a range of different sources. We need to change the paradigm around learning. We need to continually figure out the ways that we can have access to lifelong learning resources so that we can all continually solve the problems of tomorrow. And I want to suggest a model for this. So when you're young and you first start working, there's only one question normally when you sort of fall into the work box unprepared, is how can I make money? Is what are the ways that I can actually feed myself, feed my family, put a roof over my head. But after a while, you start to realize that there's an opportunity to actually do things well. If you do something okay, you get paid a certain amount of money. If you do things well, you get paid a lot more. So then it becomes the learning for many of us is what you do, what you get paid for, and what you can do well. Now, some people stop there. But as my father found with What Color is Your Parachute, if you help people understand that they have superpowers, they have unique skills to allow them to solve the problems of tomorrow, well, then there's work that you love. There's work that you can do that you feel motivated by. And then some people stop there. But in a world of constant change, where many, many people have problems that have chosen them, many people have the opportunity to be able to figure out what does the world need. And so this, I think, is a model for a fulfilled life, is what you get paid for, what you do well, what you love doing, and what the world needs. And it just so happens that this is the Japanese practice of ikigai. And so this is where I think we all have an opportunity to go through that mindset shift. Is if we're in Silicon Valley, there's a stack. Many of us move up the stack in our careers. And eventually we think, oh, when we make lots of money, well, then eventually we'll do what the world needs. Well, young people are coming out of school and they're doing exactly the opposite. They're saying, what does the world need? If I do that, that's what I'm going to love. If I love it, I'm going to get good at it. And if I get good at it, I'm going to get paid for it. And so this is a way to hit the reset button in what we think of in terms of the world of work that we all want to build. Also a chance to do what I call the annual career checkup and make sure that you have actually thought about this model in your own life. There's a great chance as we're going through this pause period to do some of that thinking. It's also a great chance to think of what we think of as dangerous opportunities. This is actually the Chinese character for crisis, Wei, which is dangerous opportunity. Unfortunately, when we see danger, we tend to narrow down to who we think of as us. So we think of the concentric circles as just being family and friends. But I'm urging you, I think, to think about what the world needs. And we need to move beyond it to continually think of the inclusive processes where we're helping the people who problems have chosen them. We're thinking of all the inclusive ways that we can think of this as an opportunity to build more inclusive futures of work. And as I say, to ensure that there's no human left behind. So as I said, go to Dividuals.com. You'll see a bunch of these links on my website. And now I think I'm going to unshare the screen, and I'm happy to run through some questions.
Awesome, thank you, Gary. I think that's a really good slide to leave up if you have the space. Oh no, you're fine. You're fine.
Sorry, I just want it.
Is there I couldn't remember. Did you have a short link for people to grab or download your slides?
Yeah, just go to Bolles.com. Just go and you'll see. Just look at reading materials on Bolles.com. It's the easiest way.
Bolles.com.
Yeah, GBOLLES.com. Sorry.
I think I got it right. Awesome. Yeah. Thank you for that. There were multiple moments where I was like, Gary's got more to say, doesn't he? He has more to say. And I was like, oh, now we're going to communities, and now we're going to countries. Yeah. So I just absolutely loved it. Right, let's take some questions from some folks. So the top one comes from Wendy, and she asks, as the future of work is rapidly changing from the industrial model, what do you see as some of the most valuable skills that we should be teaching our kids in the future?
So I always ask, it's a great question. So I'm always asked by parents around the world, well, two different use cases, young kids and then kids sort of at that inflection point, 15 to 18 and then beyond. So with young kids, I always say, if I've seen any sort of consistent characteristic for kids that I think are going to do just great, it's that they're all in on something. With my son Christian, when he was young, it was bugs, it was insects. If you'd asked him when he was 2.5, it was going to be an entomologist someday, he would have said, "Well, I am an entomologist." But then it's not bugs, it's something else, right? And so what you want is you want to continually encourage your kid to go all in on something, and it's math through bugs, reading through bugs, stories through bugs, whatever it is, and then it's dinosaurs, and then it's bows. It doesn't matter what it is. So if you continually encourage them to have those passions. And then when the kids are older, parents often ask me, especially at that 15 to 18 point, how will my kid be happy and successful? So my first response is drop successful. We're following the old rules of work. We used to think that, going to the right school and getting the right degree and getting the right job and the right field, that's too many rights. All those many rights make a wrong. That's our model. And kids today, they've got a portfolio of work. They're coming out of school and they're sure, they might have a day job, but they're driving for Uber and they're working on a startup with their friends. And this is a portfolio just like your investment counselors suggest you to distribute risk. It's a rational response to an exponentially changing world. And so I come back to those 4 skills in general. Problem solvers who are adaptive, creative, with empathy. So if you teach your kids those 4 things, you stop solving the problems for them. They fall down. Let them get up themselves. They need to solve the problem. Let them figure it out themselves, and help them to adapt and do it with creative problem solving, and especially with empathy. They're going to be just fine.
And those are also the skills that you can't ever be too good at. We're constantly improving or sharpening that axe, or whatever the analogy you want. Those 4 things. I could not agree more. All right, let's grab one more. Actually, we've got time for more than one more. It's hard to get. Oh, okay, here's a good question. So for folks that might be working from home for the first time that have kids, do you have any tips for helping that they can use to help maybe others understand the challenges that come with having kids at home? And I'll piggyback on that with the folks at Basecamp. You mentioned them earlier. They shared publicly this memo that they sent out to their company today that was basically like, listen, we know what's going on. We see you. We know your challenges. What's most important is your family and your health. And so if that means that you're working part-time, full-time, quarter-time, whatever, do what you need to do. But what are some of your general advice for parents that are at home right now with kids?
So I'm going to put those in 2 different contexts. So what you can do with the kids yourself and with coworkers. So the first thing is, not going to do that if they're still in a stroller, but even with young kids, make them part of the solution. Help them to be problem solvers. Help them to understand, that mommy and daddy, we've got this sort of new world that we're living in, and we've got these work things to do. Well, help me to figure out how I can do this. How can I set up my work environment? How can I figure out the times of day that I can work the best? How can we make sure we've got the times where we're together and we're always doing the things that are fun together, but how can we make sure that we get our work done too? And then what are you going to do while I'm getting my work done? What can you do that could be supporting the work of the family, but still be fun for you? Make them part of the process, and do sort of daily rounds during the dinner table. How did it work for you today? What problems did you solve? Oh, what new problems do you want to try to solve tomorrow? So that you're encouraging all the skills that we were just talking about. And then with coworkers, Charlene, I think, mentioned a couple of the sort of techniques around the process of communication. So think about starting each meeting with a quick go round. What's the one thing you're dealing with in your life right now, your personal life? So we can just make sure we all have empathy. And it doesn't mean we're going to solve your problem for you. It doesn't mean that you're bringing your problem to just, to tell us all to complain about it. It's that each of us have challenges we're trying to deal with. I've got a 93-year-old mother in a nursing home. I've got to figure out how I'm going to keep the kids focused on their schoolwork, whatever that is. And then if, with coworkers, just to create that fabric of empathy on a regular basis, even with senior leaders in an organization, I guarantee you're still dealing with those same challenges.
For sure. And I think to summarize there, what you're, at least what I took out of it was, I love the idea of do it together. There's so many ways that you can get other people involved right now that you might not be thinking of, right? Where it's, well, normally I would just set up my workspace and go to work, but doing it with your kids or doing it with your spouse or talking to your friends about how they're setting up, there's just so many opportunities to collaborate with others if you take an extra pause to think about it. And then the second piece is just being open with what you're dealing with. It is such a superpower, being able to put that vulnerability into your day-to-day life.
You can have your kids go research, go talk to their friends. What are they doing to help their parents to make sure that they're doing the work of the family and the work that needs to be done? So, and it's the same thing with coworkers, is what resources have you found? Is there one place you have found that can help me to figure out like what I'm going to do to make sure my kid is able to stay engaged with his or her fellow students, for example? Your coworkers should be great resources for that too. Yeah,
for sure. So let's go to Carlos's question next. He is asking about the best way or the best approach to handle fear of change. When a company is trying to shift from the mindset of, I have to see you in your seat to be able to work, that to know that you're working, versus when I can't see you, what do I do? What can people do to help their organization make that shift?
So first off, I blame us for coming up with a model where we've taught a manager that they need to be the sage on the stage as opposed to the guide on the side. We failed. We failed the managers of the world. So we need to figure out what are the incentives. I actually been spending a lot of time working on a book on the future of work, and there's a ton of neuroscience that helps us to understand just the way our minds work around risk and trust. So one of the most important things is to come back to this basic of the problems to be solved. So what any manager has is essentially their feet are being held to the fire that the work of the group is being done. Unfortunately, we fall in love with the process, the steps that we feel we have to go through to solve those problems without stepping back and really rethinking what the problem is. And Charlene's right in that there's a ton of processes that are really, really important to help us, especially when we communicate. But in terms of the problem solving itself, that's something that a manager can actually do. Rather than starting a meeting and listing out, okay, here's the stuff I've got for you to do, the manager can say, okay, now here's the 3 problems I think we need to solve. You tell me when you think between you can come up with the solutions for this. And then, okay, great. 3 days, great. We're going to come back in 3 days. And that is dialing down a whole bunch of the control for the manager, and it's dialing up the perception of risk. Make the risk explicit. So help the workers to be able to understand, okay, so if we don't hit our deadlines, then here's the critical path we're on for these other people. Now let's make sure that we're actually beating that deadline so that we don't have the risk, create the risk for others. And so that is nothing but a process of communication.
Yep. It's amazing how much communication, or how often it just comes down to communication. So if you don't tell somebody, you don't share it, they don't know, and it just creates those unnecessary challenges that we come across.
Yeah. I've got an exercise that I suggest. I'll just tell you really quickly. and you probably won't do this during the COVID reset, but maybe you will. Your manager, you tell your workers, all right, I want you all together to use a virtual whiteboard or a Google Doc, and I want you to list out all the problems that you solve. And then I want you to list out all of the tasks you perform to solve those problems. Then I want you to list out all the skills you have. And then I want you together in a virtual team, distributed work, I want you to rejigger all that. I want you to figure out whose skills are going to be used to solve what problem, because now we've had to do a reset. We're doing a rethink of all the ways we're solving these problems. That exercise alone as a manager is going to help you to be able to step back, some of the control needs. If you once you see the ways that workers, they're so much smarter about solving these problems than we ever give them credit for. To let them come back to you with the ways that they're going to adapt their work processes in this era.
Absolutely. Let's go. We'll kind of stay in this zone of workspaces, actually. So Claudia asks, do you have any tips or recommendations for how to think about the different spaces that you have in your house, like workspace, living space, children let off steam space?
So I don't want to say, well, let me put it this way. There's a range of different opportunities that each of us have. If you're living in a studio apartment versus large home or something in between. I'm gonna sound like a broken record on this. First off, bring your kids into the process. Like, let them understand that's a problem to be solved. Let them understand noise levels and how clean or not things need to be. Let them understand there's times and there need to be signals to be sent. If you're on a video conference and the kids run through doing a game of hide and seek, then maybe that's okay and maybe that's not. So you've got to figure out what that process is. I'm a big fan of letting the kids put up signs, put up labels, let them mark the territory of those different zones, and let them mark your work zone. So if there's a place you need to be able to have, even it's just the couch in the living room, where you need to be able to, especially have a cone of silence or a zone where you can get work done at particular periods of time, figure out what that process is between you, and put up labels so that the space is actually clearly defined. That's
great. Let's end on something maybe a little bit more personal. Can you tell us about what does your home space look like, and what is life under shelter in San Francisco like right now for you?
Well, so because I've been doing this for 15 years, my wife and I, we're in a same rented flat in San Francisco for 24 years. So we're actually in what used to be called the fainting room, and it's a tiny little room with no door. Where in the Victorian area, women supposedly went when they had the vapors, whatever that was, and relaxed in the afternoon. And so we're sort of knee to knee, and then the living space, is sort of behind me. So, and I'm the more casual type, and my wife is much better at staying organized. So I'm the entropy, but we've got it's a great set of alternating rhythms for us, because we've been doing this for quite some time, and now I can't do what I normally do, which is to go out and in the city and have a lot of meetings and coffee shops and that sort of thing. But now we have virtual coffee, so we built that. We got to build more and more of that into our daily routines.
Fantastic. Well, any parting thoughts you want to share with the group?
So I just want to come back to the opportunity for each individual, for everybody that's listening here, is for you, for your work, for what you're doing in your career. Think of this as a chance, even if you're taking 5 minutes or 5 days, to do that sort of career checkup. What are the things, think of Ikigai, and think of what is important for you in each of the different aspects of that portfolio. And is it time to simply double down on what you're doing now, or is it time to think of a reset? This is what we see coming out of these eras. This is the opportunity, is to think about how to go through that process of adaptation and reinvention, and especially then if you feel that you're on top of that, then each one teach 10, help 2 other people, help 10 other people. to go through the same process themselves, because we're all in this together.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate your time, and I think we'll be doing more of these in the future. So hopefully you'll join us again.
Great. Thanks a lot.
All right. We'll see you, Gary.
I appreciate it, Adam.
All right. So that is the most of our chunk on remote work, distributed work. We definitely will be creating content on that moving forward. So hopefully y'all will come back and join in. We're going to switch gears and go to education next with Josh Sturks, who should be joining us here in a couple minutes to talk about how we can make the most of learning in a global pandemic. So that will be what is up. Let me do a couple quick housekeeping slides for those of you that might just be joining us for the first time today. There we go. I swear, no matter how many times I do this, I'm still not super fast at that swap and screen thing. The team just posted all these links so you can click on them directly, but some great resources to continue to engage with us. Facebook group, share some ideas on the Be Innovative platform. We've got 6 challenges up. We'll be sharing out the results of those in the next couple of days once it all wraps. YouTube playlist. All sessions are recorded. You can watch them at any point in time in Crowdcast. That's where you're at right now. Just click on schedule, pick any session. You can go back and see them. And you can also go to our resources page, su.org/COVID-19. We link out to all the sessions. They will be up on YouTube as well in 24 hours if you need them in a different language or just prefer to share them in a different way. But feel free to take screenshots of your favorite sessions or slides, share them out. I think the more we can get this information out to the world, the better. So we definitely encourage sharing. If you didn't hear yesterday, we are doing a follow-on event with EXO and XPRIZE where we're going to be going a lot deeper on the business implications and applications of what we're talking about here. Less COVID-19 itself. We thought all of that should be free and available, but though, how is this going to impact your business, ecosystem, communities, and what you can do about it? So if you want to do more workshop type stuff, more connections, go to exoworld.live/SU to get signed up for that here in about a month. And then we are also starting to launch some podcasts here at Singularity University, and we're so excited to partner with Chris at our Singularity U Nordic partner. He's going to be talking about corporate innovation and interviewing a lot of the experts around our ecosystem on what's happening in corporate innovation. And I know that future of work, distributed work, and teams will be there. So if you want to get early access today, we're going to be releasing it here in a couple of days. But if you want to start listening to that now, sunordic.org/podcast, and you can download it there. All right. That is it for my updates. But thanks everybody for being here, and I will see you in a couple minutes.